It is Saturday morning. I'm in my guest room at my house this morning, but I have my Bible and I have my cup of coffee. So let's spend some time in God's Word today. This morning I'm going to be looking at Revelation chapter 2, starting with verse 8 to verse 11. It is the second letter that Jesus is writing to the seven churches in the book of Revelation. So it's Revelation chapter 2. Starting with verse 8. It says, "And to the angel of the church in Smyrna write, These things says the first and the last, who was dead and came to life. I know your works, tribulation and poverty, but you are rich. And I know the blasphemy of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Do not fear any of those things which you are about to suffer. Indeed, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison, that you may be tested, and you will have tribulation 10 days. Be faithful until death, and I will give you the crown of life. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. He who overcomes shall not be hurt by the second death." Now, the first thing that I want to share with you is that the name Smyrna. The name Smyrna means myrrh. We hear the word myrrh a little bit in the Old Testament. It means bitter, but the word myrrh is only found two times in the whole New Testament. So we'll play a game this morning. If you can pause the video and you can write down something in the comment section on where you think those two times that the word myrrh is located. So go ahead and pause the video and write your comment down in the comment section. Then you can come back and see if you're right. All right. Well, the first place where myrrh is located is the book of Matthew. Matthew chapter 2, verse 9 through 11. So in Matthew chapter 2, it is the story of the three magi, the three wise men. And they have been following a star, and they stopped at Jerusalem. But Jesus wasn't born in Jerusalem. And so, verse 9, Matthew chapter 2, verse 9 says, "When they heard the king, they departed. And behold, the star which they had seen in the east went before them, till it came and stood over where the young child was. And when they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceedingly great joy. And when they had come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented gifts to him, gold, frankincense, and myrrh." So that's the first time in the New Testament that we hear the word myrrh. Technically, it's not at his birth, but the story of the Magi, we're just gonna call it his birth. So first location, if you put birth, then you're correct. If you put Magi, or if you put the wise men, then you are correct. All right. The second location is found in John chapter 19. Now, if you were really good and you write the actual Bible verse down, that's bonus points for you. John chapter 19. In John chapter 19, starting with verse 38. It says, "After this, Joseph of Arimathea, being a disciple of Jesus, but secretly, for fear of the Jews." Now notice that he's afraid of the Jews. "Asked Pilate that he might take away the body of Jesus, and Pilate gave him permission. So he came and took the body of Jesus." Verse 39. "And Nicodemus, who at first came to Jesus by night, also came, bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100 pounds. And then they took strips of linen with the spices, as the custom of the Jews is to bury. And now in the place where he was crucified there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb, in which no one had yet been laid. So there they laid Jesus because of the Jews' preparation day, for the tomb was nearby. All right, so our second location, maybe you put John 19, that would be correct. Maybe you put his burial, that also would be correct. But did you catch how much myrrh that Nicodemus brought? It's a ridiculous amount. And I mean, when I tell you a ridiculous amount, it's just ridiculous, okay? Let's take a look at a comparison. John chapter 12. In John chapter 12, the story is that Lazarus has just been raised from the dead. Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead in John chapter 11, and now he's eating at the place of Lazarus and his sister Mary. Listen to this. Verse 3 says, Then Mary took a pound of very costly oil of spikenard, anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of oil. But one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, who would betray him, said, Why was this fragrant oil not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor? Now, when we try and do a comparison here, 1 pound of this expensive, costly spikenard, 1 pound, would cost 300 denarii, or a year's wages. 1 pound, the aroma or the fragrance filled the whole house, okay? The fragrance filled the house. So now, let's look at the ridiculousness of the 100 pounds that Nicodemus brings. First of all, 100 pounds. I mean, can you imagine Nicodemus carrying 100 pounds? Maybe he put it on a donkey or a little wheelbarrow or something. I don't know. But 100 pounds is just ridiculous in the amount that he had to carry. The second one is how ridiculous is the expense of it. If 1 pound is worth 300 denarii and it's a year's wages, then how much is 100 pounds? It's just a ridiculous amount of money for somebody to have. And then if 1 pound fills the whole house, with the aroma fills the whole house, how much would 100 pounds fill as far as the aroma? The garden tomb, my wife and I, again, we got to go to Israel. We got to go to the garden tomb. And it's just a very small enclosed location. It would overwhelm or overpower anybody if you were to try and do something of that nature in such a small location. Just the aroma would just be, it's unreal. It's ridiculous, the amount. Now, when we go back to Revelation 2, Jesus doesn't say anything bad about the church in Smyrna. Everything that Jesus says is good, all right? But listen to the things that he says. I know your works. So Jesus he's noticed the things in which they've done. They're working hard. They're doing the things that they need to do. They're doing God's business. But the second thing that Jesus says is, I know your tribulation. Jesus knows when we are going through difficult times. Jesus knows the sufferings and our trials, the myrrh, the bitterness of tribulation that we have to go through. And then Jesus says, and I know your poverty. I know your poverty. I don't know how many of you feel like you're poor or that you don't have enough to make ends meet all the time. But Jesus kind of corrects them. I know your poverty, but you are rich. You are rich. And I think that's an amazing thing. Then Jesus encourages them. Like I said, he doesn't say anything bad about this church. There's no, warning against this church. but there is an encouraging word for this church. He says, do not be afraid. First thing, do not be afraid of what you're about to suffer. The devil is working against you. Satan is working against you. And it says he will put some of you in jail to test you. And you will have tribulation 10 days. Tribulation 10 days. Now, the idea of testing in Daniel chapter 1, Daniel, he had set it in his heart, he had set it in his mind that he did not want to defile himself with the king's portions. Verse 8 of Daniel chapter 1 says, but Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the chief of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. And this was a amazing thing for Daniel to request. But the guy who was in charge of him was worried. He's like, I don't know if I can do this or not. And Daniel's like, well, test us for 10 days. So it's verse 12. He says, please test your servants for 10 days and let them give us vegetables to eat and water to drink. So the testing of Daniel lasted 10 days. The testing in Revelation chapter 2 lasted 10 days. When you think of Daniel and Revelation, you know that there's some kind of connections with that. At the end of those 10 days, Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego were 10 times wiser, 10 times greater than all the astrologers and magicians that Babylon had to offer. And so those 10 days I think are an important part of trying to understand the book of Revelation. But then Jesus tells his church there in Smyrna these two things. Number one, be faithful. Be faithful, even to the point of death. Be faithful even to the point of death. And I've got some good news. To him who overcomes, you will not be hurt at all by the second death. You're going to receive a crown of life. You're going to receive a crown of life. You see, all this is really interesting when we consider the name Myrrh. The only two times that it's located in the Bible, at his birth and at his burial. But his burial was very interesting because it's of who brought it. It was Nicodemus. Nicodemus, we are told, he first came to Jesus at night. It's John chapter 3. Listen to what he says. There was a man of the Pharisees named Nicodemus, a ruler of the Jews. And that's John 3 verse 1. This man came to Jesus by night and said to him, Rabbi, we know that you are a teacher come from God, for no one can do the things that you do unless God is with him. Jesus answered and said to him, most assuredly I say to you, unless one is born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God. And Nicodemus said to him, how can a man be born when he is old? How can he enter a second time into his mother's womb and be born? You see, I don't really think of Nicodemus bringing this 100 pounds of myrrh to bury Jesus. I don't really think of it as his burial. I think there's something more at play here. It's such a ridiculous amount. There's something bigger, there's something better. You see, in John chapter 12, Mary brought a pound. She brought a pound of very expensive perfume. Why? Because Jesus just raised Lazarus from the dead. But what happens in chapter 20 of John isn't Lazarus is raised from the dead. It's Jesus is raised from the dead. It's so much bigger. It's so much greater. I think that the 100 pounds of myrrh that Nicodemus brings, it's not about his burial. It's about his new birth. It's about new life that can only come in Jesus Christ. I don't know what you're going through today. I don't know what tribulation that you might have, what hard work that you might have, or I don't really know your poverty. But I want you to hear the encouraging words of Jesus. Do not be afraid. Be faithful, and you'll receive the crown of life. Thank you so much for watching my video today. Leave a comment down below. Also, subscribe, push the little bell button, notification button, so you'll be notified of all my other videos. Thank you for being with me today. God bless. Have a blessed day.